My name is Rich Schmidt. I'm here with Amy Wesselman, David Autrey. It's January 16th, 2018. We're at Westrey Winery in McMinnville. And we'll start you guys off with a nice, easy question, which is why wine?
Why wine? Well, we both had degrees in philosophy, and we're planning.
Past tense.
Well, we still have them. I was planning to go to graduate school and get my PhD in philosophy.
Don't hit the mic.
And David was planning to go to law school.
No, I applied to graduate schools
as
also.
well. That's true.
I was accepted in 2 PhD programs.
And then David Adelsheim found us jobs in Burgundy, working harvest in 1991. And so it was like I'd taken my GREs, but it was like Burgundy grad school. Obviously Burgundy got one. So I had written my thesis on Aristotelian ethics, and part of my take-home message from that was that leading a balanced life was leading an ethical life. And what I learned in Burgundy, because there's so much emphasis in working in the vineyard there, is that there's this amazing balance in wine growing, grape growing and winemaking, between working outside and working inside, working with people, working in a solitary fashion, working with science, working with your social skills, working long days, short days, physical days, sedentary days. It just seemed like a very balanced life. And we'd been living next to John Paul from Cameron Winery while we were in school, actually, and that's how we kind of got our foot in the door, learning how to, be cellar rats, essentially. And we thought, well, we know of a lot of people who have put a lot of money into wineries and then they've lost it. So why don't we start with no money and see where we can go from there? So our first vintage was in 1993. We made about 400 cases of wine, just a little bit of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, and we have slowly grown up from there.
What I think she's missing, though only politely so, was I graduated 2 years earlier than she did, and we were living together, so I was waiting for her to finish up, and with the help of John Paul was starting to work in the industry. My first vintage was in 1989 with Carol Adams at Adams Winery, and I had gotten that job because Carol had broken her wrist 2 weeks before harvest and was at a tasting, and at that time in the industry there were only about 72 wineries in Oregon, and in northern Willamette Valley there was only about 35, maybe 38, and you still went to a tasting and everybody was there. And so Carol was pouring next to John, and Carol had her hand in a wrist in a cast, and she was like, "What am I going to do?" And John was like, "I think I have a person for you." And 10 days later, I was scrubbing tanks and starting my first harvest, and got the bug. And so I started pruning at that point in time in January of 1990, worked on and off in various cellars in 90, worked a 90 harvest for Cameron, and then in August of 91 we went off to spend 6 weeks in the Rhone, working our way up, and arrived in Burgundy on September 23rd for a harvest. And later in harvest, it was a beautiful walk down the Rue du Grand Cru between Maurice Saint-Denis and Javet-Chambertin that we sort of said, we could see doing this. But we also were realistic, because at that time, when we knew that Oregon was still almost entirely family run, there were very few outside jobs available, and we were realistic about what our chances were of finding jobs. So when we came back to Oregon and started to look, we didn't have any real conception that we'd be working in the industry full time. And to that matter, we didn't really start working in the industry full-time for years, except for that Amy started in spring of '92 working as in the tasting room in Bethel Heights, and filled in for 6 or 8 weeks, I think, in the cellar there when they had an opening. And I was going to spend the '92 harvest as the lab rat for Van Duzer under Al Azevedo. But what happened is the assistant winemaker there, Gary Horner, actually took my
At
job.
Bethel Heights, right?
Well, I was going to say, he took my job as the lab rat for Al Azevedo, so I took his job as the assistant winemaker at Bethel Heights and worked the '92 harvest with Ted and Terry at Bethel Heights, which I went on to do for another 10 years. I worked '92-02 at Bethel Heights while doing other things. And in some points in time, I worked 3 harvests for a couple of different vintages in there. And it was also with some prodding from Ted and Terry that they were tired of listening to Amy and I say, well, maybe we should make some wine. And they're like, oh, how are we going to do it? And they were like, no, just get over it. So they said, we'll give you some fruit. We'll save some fruit from Bethel Heights. They called up Dan and Helen at Freedom Hill. They said, they'll sell you some fruit. We talked to a couple of other people, and that's how we ended up with 210 cases of Pinot Noir and 191 cases of Chardonnay in 1993.
Well, we felt so lucky that they were able to share that fruit that they would share that fruit with us, because I mean, to have, first of all, 1993 was an epically amazing vintage, and those 2 vineyards are amazing. Plus, we had Ted and Terry whispering in our ear, and then I ended up spending the '92 harvest working for Lynn Penarash at Rex Hill. So we had all of this advice coming from the community, and it's still that way. In a rough vintage, people get on the phone and call their friends and figure out how to handle things. You know, what are you doing? My vineyard's not coming in until next week. So what's going on in your lower elevation vineyard? How are you handling it? What's working? What's not? And that's part of the reason I think Terry Castile felt like he could be, say, here, take some of my fruit. I'll help you make the wine if you run into trouble. And then when I, after harvest at Rex Hill, screwed up all my courage and went to interview with David Lett, because Terry Castile had said, yeah, I think David needs somebody to help him in the winery, but I'm not sure he knows that yet. So I was like, oh, great. So I remember interviewing with him and being like so terrified I could barely even listen to the words that were coming out of his mouth. And
she's forgetting one of her proudest moments, which was after announcing to her mother that she was getting a degree in philosophy, who promptly said, well, what good is that for? It was when she told David that she had a degree in philosophy, and he said, yes, I do too. And it was part of the reason why she got the job, that she gets to tell her mother that, in fact, a philosophy degree did get her a job.
So I said, how much work do you think you have for me, David? And he said, I don't know, like 3 or 4 days, gross topping Chardonnay, and I worked there for 5 years straight. And it was a tremendous opportunity for me to learn from the person, Papa Pino, and a tremendous personal relationship as well. Not with just David, but with their whole family. And that's why we're here in this funny little building in McMinnville, is because I could run down here and work 2 harvests and sleep at the winery and do Westrey harvest overnight and work for David during the day, all bleary-eyed. And it was just a great experience. His vineyard team is incredible and taught me how to speak Rancho Spanish instead of my hoity-toity school Spanish, and and now I have a crazy accent apparently. But yeah, it was one of the most pivotal experiences of my career. And then I left there to work for IPNC in 1989, and I haven't been able to leave that job because I love it so much. So I do work harvest here. I do blending here. I somehow juggle that with our now 14-year-old identical twin boys, Leo and Soren, who give back. They rack our whole cellar every summer for us. They also work IPNC for a good solid week every year. I'm skipping way ahead though.
Yep.
So let's go back to where we left off here.
Well, if we go back to the why wine, some of it goes back to Amy's talk about balance, and coming out of Reed with a degree in philosophy, it was looking at what is balance, and so I pursued three things. It was to look what would law school be, what would graduate school be, and what would wine be. And wine was always something around me because Dick and Nancy Ponzi and David and Jenny Adelsheim were friends of my parents. I ran around those vineyards as a child in the early 1970s. Pat Campbell was a classmate of my mom's from school, and they still play tennis together. And so it was something in the back of my mind. You know, there was always this thing. And then with help from John Paul and starting to be in the industry, it seemed quite a balanced life. It was something that we fell into, but seemed consistent with what we wanted to do.
So once you made that decision, once you were thinking about wine, how did you go about, you obviously had all these influences in your life, but how did you go about learning the trade and learning how you would actually do what you wanted to do?
Well, that question has a very funny answer. So when we were finishing up at Reed, we were living in a big house with a bunch of other students over in Southeast Portland, and next door was John Paul and his wife Terry and their two kids, and who were really young at the time. Every time I see them, I'm like, oh my God, I babysat you when you were 2. So John would come over, and he was like easy labor source. This is great. I don't even have to be organized. So he would come over and bang on our window, because our room was in front of the house and there was a big front porch, and be like, hey, do you guys want to come and help bottle? Or do you want to help rack the cellar? Or do you want to come and help prune? And he was willing to show us our way around a cellar. And so, we happily did that, and he was very patient with us, and he kind of taught us the ropes, the basics of what it takes to be useful during harvest. And once you know how to be useful during harvest, you can get a job anywhere in the world, especially then, before, it was so hard to work in other countries. And so that's how we got the jobs in Burgundy, at Dujac and de Larlot, which were incredible experiences that were just gifted to us by David Adelsheim. And my only regret is that we didn't spend more time bouncing around the world like a lot of cellarats did at the time, getting more experience. Because once you start a winery, you're in Oregon every harvest. Maybe when the twins are fly out of the coop, we can go to New Zealand and work a harvest.
But it's also, I think that not getting a technical degree, you have the opportunity to spend an inordinate amount of time developing the importance. So taste, and we did a lot of that. Between barrel tasting in Oregon, barrel tasting in Burgundy, going to do as many different tastings as we could, talking to people that we respected, getting a historical perspective. I think that one of the important things about Oregon, you see this in Burgundy, is the idea of the history of the place. I mean, Burgundy has it encoded in the vineyards and encoded in the AOC, but what's encoded in those minutia, and in some cases, you have a Bourgogne Blanc that's 1 meter away from Montrachet. But that which is encoded is the function of over 1,000 years of observation by the Cistercian monks. And we're a long ways away from that. In fact, we're centuries away from that type of observation. And as a philosopher and a skeptic and someone who's not trying to be involved in anything but the observations of these types of things, the development of what we're trying to do and will continue to try to do is to look at those observations, listen to the history that informs them, listen to what people are saying around who are also trying to make the same types of observations, and continue that dialectic between our vines, our ground, and the wines that they're making. And it's what the wines that they're making. I mean, if we're to be honest with ourselves as people who believe in terroir, then we have to surrender ourselves as winemakers to what comes to us from the ground. And people who have technical degrees are suffering from an overt exterior training in wine science as opposed to wine history or wine growing. In French you have vigneron, or you have enologiste. You don't have a winemaker. There is no such word. And I think that's a very important philosophical difference from what you see in the New World. And I, as a self-trained individual in this industry, take that very seriously.
Yeah, I'm going to
push back.
Yeah, I'm going to call you out there a little bit, because there have been a lot of times when it's been a tricky vintage when we've called on, people who have strong technical backgrounds, education, graduate degrees in enology and viticulture, and been like, what are we going to do?
Oh yeah? Cite a source.
Anthony King, David Lett had a technical background. Certainly Lynn Penerash.
Yeah, and David Lett said that the biggest thing that he needed to do after 1970 was to forget it. His quote, not mine.
Also Lynn Scott, who's one of your dearest friends.
And he calls me about Pinot Noir.
Yeah, well, goes both ways. I mean, the nice thing I would say.
And his master's is from the University of Montpellier, a French school, not a U.S. school.
There are advantages and disadvantages. I guess the thing that we were very privileged to have was, we came from Reed, a small liberal arts college, like Linfield is a small liberal arts college, so you know what it's like to have a really strong sense of community. We moved into the wine industry, which was then a very small community and very tight-knit. Everybody took care of each other. Also, nobody wants Oregon wine to be bad and going out into the market, because it's bad for all of us if that happens. And so we felt comfortable being not just self-taught, but community-taught, because people were behind us. They stood behind us and they helped us along. And we've tried to do that as we have pursued our path as well.
What were some of the challenges of owning a vineyard and a winery, especially some of the unforeseen challenges once you guys got Westrey off the ground?
Having twins.
That got in the way.
The first year wasn't so bad when they were still, we were just, they're babies, and you could put them in their car seats and upend a barrel, and you could just be racking barrels or doing punch downs. They'd be like, oh, that's really interesting. I'm super entertained. The next year, when they could walk and climb ladders, and I caught one of them climbing, I don't remember which one was which. I think it was
both at the top of the tank.
Yeah, it was Leo. Leo, I think, went up first, and then Soren climbed up behind him and was trying to throw him off the ladder so he could get by. And this is a concrete floor, so we're like, all right, no more babies in the winery. this is done now. And yeah, so that was challenging.
I think one of the challenges that when we got into the industry, and it was still a very community industry, it was still very small, and it was possible to play the millionaire's game without any money. The biggest challenge is to still survive and still to function in what has become an increasingly competitive industry, and increasingly competitive market, and a market that is no longer as community oriented as it was when we entered it. Now, this is the beginning of my 30th vintage and Amy's 28th vintage. And it is a very, very different animal than it was when we started all those years ago. And when, this is Westrey's, shows you I'm starting to lose count. What are we, 25, 26, 27? 27, Westrey's 27th vintage. It's a very different animal and requires a different skill set than when we entered it, and you could, cover all the bases as an individual, and if you couldn't, then you could find people that you could ask to help you through a certain type of situation. And I don't see that as any more possible. It's subdivided, and those subdivisions are more professional, which isn't in and of itself a bad thing. It's just that it's a different type of animal than when we got in it, and it was very much, you were capable of doing and learning to do everything as an individual.
Right. I mean, on the other hand, it's really nice to go to, say Georgia, and be marketing your wine, and not have people say, well, where's Oregon? You make wine there? Why? That doesn't happen anymore. That's a huge step forward. So yeah, I mean, the growth is amazing, and it's hugely positive on a number of different levels. But yeah, it's taken a lot of adaptation.
So when you mentioned some of the mentors you had getting into, you obviously mentioned David Lett, and you also mentioned that you're trying to kind of pass that on. So, and you mentioned before the interview that you kind of use this space to help other people. So, is that something you still see in the industry? Do you still see a lot of that kind of veterans helping newcomers, or is that changing also?
I think.
Well, to a certain extent, we've launched in the sense that we've offered space and advice to at least 3 wineries that have come out of our space. So we feel like we've done that. Mm-hmm. I think that we've seen a number of other people who have given individuals, assistant winemaker positions, or who had cellar, started as cellar rats and moved up to cellar masters, and moved into assistant winemakers, and had the opportunity to start their own labels. So yes, I do. I continue to think that that's true.
Agree.
So you talked also about IPNC, obviously your other big role. So tell us kind of about how you got started with IPNC, and then sort of how you've seen your role since you started in 1989.
Well, that has changed a lot too. So I joined the board of directors in, I think, 1988, and about a year.
It was 87, right? That's the first.
I'm sorry, 1998.
Yeah, but 87 was the first.
87
IPNC.
was the first IPNC.
Yeah.
I joined the board of directors in 1998. Maria Stewart was the executive director then. She got pregnant and decided that was too much of a job for her, especially since her first child was born during IPNC, during her first IPNC, on Saturday of IPNC. So I would have a little PTSD around that if I were her. So she told me she wanted to step down, and I decided to step into that position. And at that time, it was what seems like it seemed really complex, but it has, become so much more complex and so much more ambitious and so much more refined. And it's been just an amazing experience to watch it grow and to watch its presence on the international wine scene become so much more well known. And it's given me an amazing opportunity to meet so many people from around the world, media guests, but winemakers mostly from all over the place, and chefs from all over the place. But I think what keeps me going back year after year more than anything else is just the sense of collaboration. It's incredible because we're a 2.5 person office most of the year. And then we balloon to 300 volunteers, all of the Linfield students that do all the food service, all of the Linfield staff that sets up all the tables and chairs and all the logistics. And then of course, there's the whole conference and events planning crew. And then we have additional hired staff for that week as well. So it's, you were talking about, 600 to 800 people probably that work for that week, or at least the weekend to put that thing on, including over 300 volunteers that all need to be managed by 2.5 people. So once, it was stressful leading up to the event, and then once all of the reinforcements show up, you're like, oh, that's how this is going to actually take place, because you're here. And these people are so dedicated and have been coming back year after year after year. And it's almost like summer camp to see them all again. Everybody's so happy. Everybody's so excited to roll out this new program, because it's, we reinvent it every year. And every year it's like, okay, the mountain's over here and it needs to move over here. Everybody get their shovels out, and then by the end of the weekend, it's over there. And that's just an amazingly gratifying experience to work in collaboration with so many people from all over the world to do that.
So she talks about volunteers.
Yeah,
I'm one of those volunteers.
He's definitely one of my best volunteers.
I was a volunteer before she was executive director. My first IPNC was 1989, and I've pretty much done it. I think I missed one in there somewhere, but I've been a volunteer in the wine room. So it's all the logistics of the approximately 600 cases of wine down to moving individual bottles to individual places. We pride ourselves by calling us the most detail-oriented distribution company in the world. But there are, in the wine room, which is up to about 8 of us now, but there are people that have, a whole lot of us that are over 20-year volunteers in that position. And there are a lot of people who have volunteered for IPNC at this point in time for over 20 years. And we have people that come in from all over the country to volunteer, because it is, in some sense, a summer camp. It's a reunion. It's a chance to see these people that we see once a year. And the camaraderie and the collaboration is part of the experience, and along with pulling out your shovel and moving dirt from point A to point B.
How has you mentioned how the logistics have gotten complicated. How has the reputation of IPNC progressed since you've been a part of it?
I guess it's progressed apace with the Oregon wine industry. The IPNC has definitely gained national, international attention, and that happened from the beginning because it was such a strange little event. The idea that winemakers would come together, not in a competition, but to just basically share ideas and to include interested consumers and trade all together in this weekend. That's a pretty unusual idea. And that concept all originated in the back room at Nick's in 1986 with winemakers and people that lived in the community. They were like, yeah, this would be something that would be fun to do, basically. It was never meant to be this massive marketing effort, and it's still really not a massive marketing effort. It really brings people together, and that's what gives me the most gratification. It does help people market their wine. The first year that Westrey was included in IPNC, we sold all our wine that weekend. So we bring in, we bring in a lot of new consumers and kind of convert them into Pinot fanatics over the course of 3 days. Because you could come to IPNC and not know anything about Pinot Noir. And by the end of the 3-day period, you'll know more than like 90% of the people out there. And love Oregon and love wine and probably want to come back. Mm-hmm. And so it's this, yes, that means it's a marketing event because it does those things. But what's really beautiful about it is that it just brings people together over food and wine, which is an age-old tradition that we'd love to uphold.
I think she's also selling herself short because there are almost no other places in the world in which you can sit down at a table and there's a world-class Burgundian, there's a world-class producer from the Alto Adige that 99.999% of Americans probably didn't even know about. And his English is good, his jokes are funny, and his wines are outrageous. This is something that IPNC does, and in the words of great art, flattery is imitation, mm-hmm. And you don't see a whole lot of Cabernet or Syrah events, but there are like 18 different Pinot Noir events all over the world, all modeled on IPNC, and IPNC was the first, and it was the first before any Syrah event or any Cabernet event, and it was created because of very good relationships between Oregon and Burgundy, mm-hmm. relationships that are just going stronger every day as we get more people from Burgundy moving here to make wine. Relationships that are expanding because we now have people from Germany, people from Alsace. We've had dabblings from Champagne, who are all coming here to the Northern Willamette Valley because of the reputation of how good the fruit is, how distinctive it is, and how classic it can be. Mm-hmm. And that's as much a function of IPNC as it is to the initial people like David Adelsheim, who consistently went over to Burgundy. But also David spoke, and I think he still speaks fluent German, and went very often to Germany to talk to people about growing grapes and talk to people, especially at the time in the early 80s when there was a lot more people trying to make a Riesling. In that period of time there was a dip, and now there are many more people coming back trying to make Riesling and realizing that Riesling is something that may really have success here. So there has been this very, very long tradition in the valley of collaboration writ large, whether it's just between local winemakers or winemakers in other regions, and IPNC brings this all together for a weekend with the average couple from Atlanta or San Diego or Tokyo, and everybody sits at the same table and everybody eats good food and drinks good wine, and that's the great leveling field.
Well, to give you a very specific example, one of the spin-off events from IPNC it takes place in Tokyo, and the originator, a man named Yoshiji Sato, came to IPNC many years ago, like 10 years ago, and he loved it so much that he kind of recreated it in Tokyo. He's also a wine journalist for a prominent newspaper. He came back to IPNC, the Oregon Wine Board helped pay for his expenses, and he wrote a huge piece on IPNC with beautiful pictures, and then the Wine Board had it translated so we could actually read all the wonderful things he said about it. And now I have this file folder of people from Korea and China and Japan and Australia, media people who want to come and get a free ticket to IPNC because they want to see what it's all about. And not just as a result of that article, but that has been a trend that I've been noting over the last several years. And so we have a media committee meeting this afternoon to weigh the cost benefit of having these people come from so far when not that many wineries in Oregon market in those areas, although that's growing and growing. But if you take the long game, then yeah, we should absolutely be looking for media in those areas. So it's always growing.
Another part of the collaboration, the way that these you know the tentacles spread out. I don't remember how many years ago, but the founder and director of the slow food movement came from Turin, Italy, and was so impressed. Talked to Amy, and Amy went over to Slow Food at their every 2-year festival and took 6, 8 Oregon Pinot Noirs.
I think 6. Yeah.
And made a presentation on the professional side of small Oregon producers that were doing, you know, sustainable types of productions of distinctive Oregon Pinot Noirs. And it was one of the very, very first of the seminars to be entirely signed up for and completed. And I'm not trying to put words in her mouth, but she sells herself short on these situations. She said that the first presentation was a little bit startling because you're wearing a headphone set and it's simultaneously translated into 6 languages, so there's a delay. But like after delay, and she started to get response, and you see people's faces that it went on beautifully. So I was a little jealous that she got a trip.
Yeah,
she got a trip to Italy.
That was a pretty big win.
It was like right at the end of harvest. So like I'm finishing up harvest, and she's in Italy having a great time at Slow Food. A little bitter here.
Yeah, that was probably best IPNC perk ever.
And you're also the winery chair on the board of directors for Salud as well. So tell us a little bit about why Salud.
Oh, I was. I'm no longer.
Sorry.
Yeah.
I didn't say is. Was.
Yeah, there's a huge problem, obviously, in this country with providing healthcare to not just undocumented workers, but to people of other cultures. So, as you know, an educated white female, I have trouble negotiating the healthcare system. As somebody who is not of this culture, even if you have a valid social security number, it's still incredibly challenging and scary. And you probably have relatives who are undocumented. You probably have friends who are undocumented. There's a tremendous sense of fear in approaching any sort of, you know, monolithic institution such as a hospital. Mm-hmm. So, you know, and then there's just the run-of-the-mill, like a referral, like what do I do, so now what do I do with this referral? And yeah, it's just, So it's one of my biggest frustrations as a viticulturalist right now is that if there are undocumented people, and I'm sure there are, basically the situation is if I'm legally obligated to see documentation that looks to be real, and I have copies of that on all of our workers, I'm sure some of it is real and some of it is not. However, I can't buy health insurance for them because they will cross-check Social Security numbers. They can't take advantage of the Oregon Health Plan or the ACA because if they don't have a valid Social Security number. So all these people have fallen directly through the safety net of healthcare and have landed on the ground. And I know of people who have been too scared to go to the hospital, and so they suffer through their heart attack and have died at home. And this is heart-wrenching to me. And Leda Garside and Maria McCandless at Salud are some of the most dedicated people to fixing this problem that I've ever seen. And they do it on the ground, one patient at a time. Leda is the head of providing services, and I know that she's been to the houses of our employees to just help walk them through situations. If you don't speak any English and there's not a translator, certainly when translation services are getting a lot better. When I started in the industry, one of my first things I did, I think it was my first harvest, no, it was my second harvest at Eyrie. The vineyard manager's brand new wife, who had just come up from Mexico, had a baby in the middle of harvest and had a C-section. And so I was asked to please go to her follow-up appointment, like whatever it is, 4 days later, and translate. Awkward. But at least I wasn't her kid, which is the norm. You get, like, she didn't have any other kids, but you have a 6-year-old in that position, or a 6-year-old in that position of walking your parents through their divorce proceedings. I've seen all of these things happen in my years in the industry, and that community of people that is the basis of support for our whole industry. This industry would not exist without them. I don't know how they even function. It's shocking. Actually, a Linfield student came to me for an informational interview 5 or 6 years ago, and he was the leader of the Hispanic American club or group or whatever it was at Linfield. And we were talking just about logistics and this, that, and the other. But by the end, we kind of got down into the nitty-gritty, and he said, yeah, I live in Salem with my parents, and I still do all the shopping. I was like, why do you do all the shopping? In addition to all your studies, it must be hard. He said, well, I don't want my parents to go to the store. And I said, why? I said, well, they're undocumented, and there are these vans, these white vans that sit outside the parking lot of Winco and Costco and Walmart. And they actually make PSAs over the store intercom and say the white vans are outside, stay in the store. And I was like, well, who is in the white vans? And he said, well, I don't know. And I was like, what? You have a Social Security number. You're documented. You're born here. You're a U.S. citizen. Why don't you go and find out? They'll come after my parents. It's very complicated and tragic. And the fact that these people are so dedicated to our family, our grapes, our business, and they put in so many hours of backbreaking labor, it's a great gift to this industry. And I think we should keep that top of mind every day.
That's why Salud.
That's why Salud.
Which, by the way, thanks to Tom Helly, the Linfield Nurses Program, in conjunction with Salud, has made major contributions by providing internships for the nursing program, which has turned around and provided important infrastructure for Salud. So that has been a win-win for both programs and organizations, and is one more value that Tom has provided to the industry, and the industry has turned around and provided to Linfield. And what's Jeff's last name? Who's
Peterson.
Jeff Peterson, who actually helped us out for the first time in the wine room last year. He got his first taste of what it means to be part of the great wine distribution system. But he produced what I thought was one of the great lines that, you know, it took Jeff and Tom, was it two Episcopalians to bring wine to a Baptist colony?
It's very weird having wine archives next to Baptist archives. I got to tell you.
We're all going to miss Tom. I really have enjoyed Tom through the last few years.
You're not the only one.
even though I was a volunteer at IPNC for many years under Dr. Bull and met her on many occasions, I never really had a chance to have a conversation with her. But I had many good conversations with Dr. Helly, and I'm going to miss him.
And he's going to be an invaluable loss type. Well, hopefully we'll have a wonderful person who comes in and is as supportive of IPNC as Tom has been, but it's been wonderful working with him over the years.
Well, I think that Linfield is not going to be able to get rid of the wine program and IPNC. I think Tom's
he's built it up
too much.
But he's pretty irreplaceable.
Yeah, he's been wonderful for us as well, of course. So we are all going to miss him as well. So as you look back, what are you proudest of? What are your biggest accomplishments in the Oregon wine industry?
You know, I always wonder whose recycling bins our wine bottles end up in, and who enjoyed our wine, what conversation they had over it, what they ate with it. We made a lot of bottles of wine over the years, and you know, there are countless stories out there that we'll never hear. We hear some of them from our customers, but we have some pretty awesome stories from our customers.
We do have the occasional voicemail.
Like 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, somebody.
I'm having a bottle of wine. It's so awesome.
Yeah, but
that's very gratifying.
I mean, there are voicemails from customers, people that we know over the years, but there are voicemails from strangers, people that we've never met, that read it off the back of the bottle, read the number off the back of the bottle, or read a cork in Chicago or Montana or California, that called just to say, you know, we've enjoyed this bottle of wine, it's this type of evening, or it's, you know, it's Mac and Cheese Tuesday, and that it made a real impression. It made a difference. And the combination of knowing that we did something that enhanced somebody's endeavor, and that food and wine elevated the experience that we as human beings, I mean, we're creatures of experience and pleasure. We especially in this modern age, have become so much more obsessed with visual information in the age of the smartphone and the computer and digital information. And we're in a business that is entirely about the sense of taste and the sense of smell and the sense of touch, and only a little bit, especially with Pinot Noir, where people talk about color, but color is irrelevant in Pinot Noir. So that it comes to you that you've made that difference in somebody's life, even if it's only fleeting. Mm-hmm. But that, in conjunction with the fact that as she said, we made a lot of wine, and we get to open a bottle every so often with friends and family, and have that combination of a historical moment, the movable feast that bottle represents from when we can say, oh yeah, I remember, this happened in '93, and we for us, we had a bottle of our first vintage of Oracle, of 04 Oracle, the other day, and we remember 04 because, and we don't remember a lot from that era because the twins were 17 months in 04. But 04 was also the first vintage that they did pigeage. And it was also the first vintage that we got some fruit off of our old vine Pinot. And so we have a very clear memory of the twins with about 8 inches of old vine Pinot doing their first pigeage, stamping around in it. And it was cold, and they weren't really into it. But more importantly, we had 5-gallon bucket of warm water, and for them to, and Soren didn't like it. He would like fight him in there, got enough and pour a little bit on him so he didn't have too much sugar, and got him a towel and he ran away. But Leo, the showman, he figured out that this was something he knocked down in that bucket, looked over it at us, and burst out, and we got exactly the response from the adults there. He continued that until he was out of water and he was cold again. And having that 04, seeing how it evolved, sharing it with the twins, and being able to recount the story, that's part of this tension between something that's organic and evolves, and it reaches a peak and then it fades. And that's the story arc of any human. It's the story arc of the wine that we make. And you hope that somewhere along the story arc of a wine that contributes to someone's experience, and it's a enhancement and an enjoyment and a pleasure. And every so often we get a little feedback about that, and that's great. So yes, that's what we try to do, and crawling through our vines and tending to them and watching them grow, and you find at this time of year you go back and you remember a vine from last year, and you see what you did and what you did right, what you did wrong, how it grew, and whether you kind of nudged it in the right direction or it didn't like what you were doing at all, and so it decided to do something entirely else, and then you have to listen to it and say, okay, well, you didn't really like that haircut, so how about we try something slightly different and see if you like this one.
Yeah, I think also, surprisingly, having winery has been a great parenting tool for us, in that Leo and Soren know, first they learned what it looked like to work an 18-hour day of physical labor. It's not like it's glamorous. Mm-hmm. It's not. It's, it's driving tractors. It's cleaning hoses. It's cleaning buckets. It's basically a lot of major dishwashing of presses and crusher stemmers and stuff like that. And now that they're older, when they come out, they're not on their iPads. They want to participate, and so they're working all day. This is probably against child labor laws, but but that's what they wanted. We couldn't pull them away from it. They want to participate, and they don't care that they're picking grapes alongside of our pickers, and there's not a racial tension there. That makes me very gratified. They then come back into the winery and they work the afternoon with an evening, and we have meals together, and it's just on the weekends, but still they get this experience, and it's kind of a lost art. There aren't very many farm families out there anymore, and that's what winemaking is. It's farming. So it's been a unique way to bring them up. I mean, I don't know if they'll take over the winery or not. My guess is not. They'll be like super nerdy physicists. So if you're watching this, Leo and Soren, later, you do what you want to do. But
last I checked, University of Dijon's not on the list. It's MIT.
Yeah. That's fine.
It does lead me to my next question, though, which is, what is the future for Westrey?
I don't know. It depends on, not only what the twins want to do, but what our nieces and nephews want to do. We've been talking about putting a tasting room up at the vineyard. Our vineyard site is gorgeous, but now they've just done all these renovations to the street here. So we like being in the community here in McMinnville. You can run down to Irie and get a bag of SO2 on, I think we still owe Jason a bag of SO2 from Harvest. We swap forklifts so regularly, because everybody's got a forklift, like one of us always has a forklift breakdown during harvest, that we joke about just renting one and parking it at the corner of 10th and Alpine and leaving the key like hidden on the tire so that we just have access to it.
Yeah, because at the beginning of the harvest, our forklift wouldn't go in reverse, and Remy's forklift, her rotator didn't work. So I was like, you can borrow our rotator, and you'll have to use your forklift to pull ours backwards. So you can use our forklift, because we did our entire first day of crushing by having to position things so that we could lift up boxes and roll the forklift backwards. No reverse. Part of harvest, part of the fun of it is all of the innovation on the fly. I think that's one of the things that keeps us coming back.
It's true. It's a new challenge every year.
Yeah, fruit's a new challenge every year, but there's also all of the technical, the logistical.
Well, it's like getting all the Christmas lights out, and you're like, oh, they don't work again. I thought they worked when we took them off the tree last year, but they don't work this year.
What about the future of the Oregon wine industry in general? What do you see happening in the next 5, 10, 20 years?
There's still a lot of land to be planted out there. I think when we came into the industry, somebody told me, I think maybe it was David Adelstein, that the best vineyard probably hasn't been planted yet. And we know so much more than we knew then, but I still think there's so much more to discover. And clonal selection and rootstock selection is something that we have a long distance to go on. And then, of course, national marketing is something that the Willamette Valley Wine Association is working really hard on.
I think that there are very interesting vineyards to be discovered. I'm continuing to search for vineyards out in the Coast Range that are planted on the soil type pea vine. It's a slate soil type. It's the only slate soil type that I know of that's in the northern Willamette Valley, and tying into the discussion about Jimmy, he had 2 vintages of a vineyard from the Coast Range on pea vine, and it was outstanding. Myron used to make a single vineyard from the Skoughton Vineyard, also on pea vine, outstanding. So I think I agree with Amy strongly that there are very interesting vineyard sites that have not been found. I think that, like we're seeing in almost every single other growing region in the world, that there's going to be a continued bifurcation in the industry between small and large. There are going to be more large wineries. I think whether Jackson Family or A to Z or any of the rest of these are going to get bigger, and there are going to be more and more wineries our size that are just 4,000 cases and stay that way. I think we're going to see more assistant winemaker side projects that are in the 400 and 500 case category. I think we're going to see some work in new varieties. I'm not as convinced as some people that Pinot Noir is going to become a minority. I think that that's an incorrect assumption. I do think that grapes that have great, or varieties that have great elasticity in their styles, Riesling and Cab Franc are the ones that come to mind right up front. I think we're going to see more of those.
Well, and it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out with climate change as well, because Pinot Noir is kind of an indicator species in terms of climate. It really
species varietal. One species.
It has to ripen in a cool climate, and as the climate warms, I mean, Burgundy, the Burgundian perspective on that is just like, this is already happening. We're having hailstorms every year, and it's because of climate change. Here, we've had a string of warm vintages, and I think, if you talk to Greg Jones, he would say that has to do more with the El Nino La Nina effect, but he gave it a seminar at IPNC several years ago, and everybody who walked out of it was like, ugh. Because it's real, and it's happening, and it will affect Pinot Noir first, so.
Interesting. What advice would you have for someone who wanted to join the Oregon wine industry today?
How much money do they have?
and yeah, you really have to think about why you want to get into the business. Do you want to get into it because you want to talk about it at cocktail parties, or do you want to get into it because you like washing barrels and you love crafting great wine?
Do you want to get into it because you have spent a lot of time tasting and you have a vision, or do you want to get into it because you have a technical degree and you want a job?
Which is fine, but you have to find your right niche in the wine industry depending on what your answers to those questions are. If what you really want to do is prune vines all day and be outside, that's one thing. Expect to make a certain amount, and it's not going to get bigger. Or start a very small winery and do it all yourself. But know that that's going to be really, really challenging, because you're not going to have a national sales director, because you have to sell the wine. You can't just make it. So yeah, shop around and think of all the different places that you could fit into the wine industry, and what your place would be, and how fulfilling it really would be for you.
Yeah, I think it comes down to what is it that. Why do you want to get into the industry? There are so many questions about whether it's about ego. I have great respect, and I've known Adam Campbell for a long time, but I have no interest in building an empire. I have much more interest in the minutia of, the 88 barrels of Pinot Noir I have. I barely can keep a top of it right now, much less, 300 or 500 or 800 or however many Adam's up to. Do you do it for real passion? And if so, do you need an empire and passion? I don't necessarily think that those are the same. I mean, Alexander the Great had both empire and passion, but that's a unique individual in history.
Well, and I think Adam is unique in that way too, in that David
Adelsheim is that way
Yeah, absolutely. They want to just like grow, learn, be curious, grow, learn. I mean, it's just this sort of cycle of growth and there's nothing wrong with that.
I
It's
didn't
just-
say there was. I just said it's not me.
Yeah, it's just not us.
You know, I like the detail in the small, which is not to say that there isn't, you know, interest in detail in the large. It's just not who I am. But there are people that, as Amy said, do it for having it in the cocktail. There are people that do it because it goes back to the balance that we talked about. You know, if you are the small, then you have this incredible, you don't think about cycles in days, you don't think about cycles in weeks, you think about cycles in quarters and growing. You know, this time of year is this balance between what's going on in individual barrels and what's going on in individual plants as you're pruning them. Then you get to the middle of the growing season and you're up early in the morning for spraying, and you're in the afternoon trying to rack and get you know, wines that are finished up ML, that are fragile, protected and put away for the season. And you know, come the end of the growing season, you're looking at harvest, and you're fine tuning your crop levels, and you're getting ready for bottling, and you're starting to haul equipment out that you haven't, you know, looked at for a year, and try to remember what it was when you put it away. You know, did you miss something? Did you have to replace something? Did you blow a fuse? Did you know, how was it functioning a year ago? Because you don't look at things in 9 to 5, and you certainly don't look at things from Monday to Friday. It's a very different perspective, but that goes back to what the individual is, and it goes back to what they're looking for. So I think that the answer to the question is extremely individual. I don't see any generic answer to it at all.
Just be prepared to work hard.
Either that or you know, again, just delegate and sit on your director's chair.
That's all the questions I have for you for this part of the interview. Is there anything I should have asked? Anything else you'd like to add?
I don't think so, except to just say once again that we're extremely grateful for the community of people that helped us along the way. There's no way that Westrey would ever exist without the help of a list of people way too numerous for me to list off right now. That's just the truth of it, and I know it's true for a lot of other people too.
Well, what I would say is that I'm glad to hear that the archive is trying to put this together, because I think that history is something that a lot of people that are coming into this industry are missing, and that, you know, you go to the places where people have been making wine for a long period of time, and even if you come in from outside, you cannot escape history hitting you in the face like a large fish. So even the people that are coming to Burgundy from outside who have decided that they're going to make wine, and we know a couple of people who are young and came to Burgundy and made very, very small quantities of wine in corners. You cannot escape the history there. You cannot escape the idea that there's so much information within the land, and you have to listen to that information. Oregon is so new that people need to know their history. People need to at least have an opportunity to explore that history, because making wine in a vacuum is detrimental. And so I'm very happy to hear that the archive is trying to find as many of the people that that proverbially struggled in the dirt and the trenches to get us as far as we are, because unfortunately the old guard is passing away, and we want to preserve this history before it's gone, because the land will be here before and was here before us, and will be here long after us, but we have only a short period to make our contribution to listening to it.